Biography? Yes, I am.
Bourbon Street, that's a pretty good spot for a preacher because I never run out of prospects down there. I'll tell you, and you'll have some
Well,
prospects.
I'm wondering if you don't have any self-confidence. You know, you should go to the spot where the job might be a little bit more difficult.
I've tried those. What did you have in mind?
Well, anything, but come on, Bourbon Street. What do you want to interfere with a good time for?
But you know, I find it much easier, maybe it shouldn't be easier, to deal with folks that are having a good time than it is these self-righteous people, these holier than thou folks, you know, the ones that think they've got it up here, they have just enough to endure it instead of enjoy it. And you know, they've responded well to me on Bourbon Street because they see I'm trying to help instead of hurt. When I first
are you really trying to help anybody, though, when you try to bring them to your beliefs?
Well, I haven't seen too many it's hurt. And that's the evidence you have to go by.
How would you be able to recognize whether or not they're hurt, though?
When you can see a home made out of a house and a man made out of a mistake and purpose found in a person's life. And
you know, though, I think that sometimes for the people in America, it might be well to make some homes into some houses, if you get the meaning of my terms.
I'm sure I get the meaning of your terms, and I'm hoping you get the meaning of mine, because I have never met a person who was dissatisfied with the way of life that I recommend. Can you say that about atheism?
Well, the atheists aren't dissatisfied with their way of life, but I think that we're dissatisfied when we see what the Christians are doing to the human community constantly.
I am too. I'm very dissatisfied, and this is why we have these Wake Up America crusades and trying to get us to do more for our God.
What's this Wake Up America?
It's just a little name that we have trying to get God's people to wake up and put the Lord first place. Because,
but you know, if America wakes up, what America will do is kick Christianity out, and all of you preachers.
The ones that I'm talking about waking up are the ones that would love the Lord and not kick him out, because the crowd I'm talking to about waking up are the ones who should love the Lord and claim to do, but they kind of in an apostate condition.
Why should I love the Lord? Why should anybody else love the Lord? What has the Lord ever done for any of us?
First, I don't know what he's done for you.
I'm talking, when I say us, I mean, I'm talking
I can tell individually what he's done for me, because he's changed my life. He's given me direction in life.
Why don't you say she?
I'd rather say he, because he's the Son of God. He's not the daughter of God, see? He's the Son of God. See, the basis of my faith. Are you
talking about somebody specific then when you say
I'm talking about Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ. He's precious. He's wonderful.
You hear the contempt? You see the contempt in her face and her voice?
12 years ago.
You don't even know him. You don't know what you're talking about, because he's
just looking for a way to argue and be defensive about every single thing.
That's what atheists do. They split hairs about everything.
Person. So how could he be intervening with you?
Well, it's wonderful how he changed my life. It's a wonderful way how
he made. It's wonderful how you changed your life. Why did you do it?
I was looking for insurance prospects, and I got saved. I didn't go to church to get religion. Because
you got the real insurance.
Oh, I really did, beyond the grave, in a place called heaven. But you know, most people today.
You really believe that there's such a thing as a heaven?
Yes, I do.
Where do you think it's located?
It's opposite from hell.
And what do you think you're going to do there?
Well, I don't really know all what I will be doing, but I know I'll be with the Lord, and that's a pretty good rapport and pretty good format.
Wouldn't you rather be with a nice, healthy female angel up there?
I don't think so.
Floating around on a nice little soft cloud.
That sounds good.
What a sick puppy she is. What a deranged woman.
She just threw that in there. Wow.
Yeah. Well, she was a sexual deviant earlier in her life.
Beautiful.
I'm sure heaven might be even a little better than that, because I've floated on a few that backfired on me here in America and this side of heaven. But you know, to know the Lord and what he's done for me personally is the greatest benefit I've ever had in my life.
But why inflict it on somebody else? I don't care what you think the Lord did for you at all. That's immaterial, because the only thing that you're using this for is for some sort of a healing of a
What do you
sickness
use in your way of life for, Madeline? What do you use in your way? Do you mind if I call you Madeline? You think I should say Miss O'Hara?
No, I don't. I
Just
was
call me
named
Bob.
after Mary Magdalene, you know.
Yeah, that's a good name. She found the Lord. I'm hoping you will.
I wish she had found the Lord. You know, if she had really found the Lord and they had had a violent love affair, he might have been a little bit more human being.
I think he was fully human. He was more human than...
She's a sick puppy. All right, let's fast forward this.
Yeah, she's definitely a very bitter, hateful woman.
Have been developed by mankind over thousands of years. This has nothing to do specifically with Christianity.
Let's get away from the codes and come back to the personal heart. Okay, let's just leave this over here. Just the personal heart. Before I even knew what the Ten Commandments were or where they were located in the Bible, I knew in my heart when I was involved with adulterous living that I was wrong.
So you went around committing adultery, and this is why you're so steeped in guilt and sin because of that. What, did the husband catch you?
I guess maybe I had more luck than you did. I found a better crop than you did, maybe, huh? But this was before my conversion, and of course, since my conversion, I've had the strength not to fall for this fleshly, lustful thing that I had
Now, don't knock sex. You know, this is a
I'm not
good
knocking
human
it.
passion.
Bless God,
Her
I enjoy it.
arrogance and her lewdness and ridiculous responses. I love his responses, man. All his responses have been pretty
Yeah.
good.
I tell you, the Lord saved me. He didn't earn me, you know. I want to put this in real quick because that's the joy of living. Sex is a great gift of God when you direct it and use it right.
Well, I'm glad that you at least
yes, I'm alive. Honey, I'm just sitting here just as blossom and just as full of life as anybody.
All right,
love me.
but now, why do you want to thrust this on anybody else? Because you're enjoying yourself finally, and you got caught by that errant husband. Let's take this thing, whatever it is that you're afflicted with. And your own in a nice little padded room.
Yeah, my wife and her mother-in-law when I got converted.
All right, I'm going to find something out.
I was going to say, does she like blow up on him somewhere?
I don't think she would, because that would make her look bad. But I think she really wants to.
I don't think she cared about looking bad. There was some interviews where she did kind of say some foul language and walk out on the people.
Because atheists, they try to look like the what's the V word? Like they are. Damn it.
You talking about the villain?
No.
You said the V word, didn't you?
Yes, but there's another one. Like when you try to look good. What's that?
Vile? Vicious?
Virtuous. They tried to look virtuous.
Oh.
They tried to look like level-headed and fair, but like deep inside, like they're not. But they like I think Cosmic Skeptic is like this, and I've seen some other atheists on YouTube who they make like a guide on like how I left like Christianity, and they like try and stay really calm, but their whole argument is like emotional, and you know that it doesn't make sense for them to be making like an emotional argument and not showing any emotion at all. So it kind of like gives them away, if that makes sense, if anyone's following. I hope it is. Like you've had like atheists come into this server and they try and be logical and they say, "Oh yeah, I'm a logical person," but then when you pinpoint them on their like beliefs, that they're irrational, right?
All right, here's a video of the best of Madeline Moyo hair.
Cool.
What do you have against God?
First,
why does he bug you?
Well, first off, there isn't any, and second off, the idea which you invented has caused more misery to every human being in all ages of history than any other single idea.
Madeline.
You're going to spend your whole life preparing to meet the Lord. Boy, you folks are crazy as hell.
This is why we have these Wake Up America crusades and trying to get us to do more for our God.
What's this Wake Up America
It's just a little
crusade?
name that we have trying to get God's people to wake up and put the Lord first place. Because
But you know, if America wakes up, what America will do is kick Christianity out, and all of you preachers.
the ones that
Your grief is not assuaged as would be the religionist who believes that there is another place where happiness will again be abundant.
Oh, that's a big lollipop.
I know you don't believe that. I'm
we
asking.
must look at them, and we never say they've passed over, or they're gone to their reward, or they have been transported, or anything else. People are dead.
I want to ask Miss O'Hara, what is she going to do with Jesus, who is to return to earth?
Yeah, when Jesus comes back, you mean?
What is she going to do with Jesus?
Oh, I'm sorry, but I think you're just as funny as can be. Now, if a little green man with purple horns would knock on my door and say, "I'm from Mars and I just descended," I'd believe him. But a shaft of light coming down and Jesus Christ digging up all these old dead bodies and resurrecting them when we're overpopulated already, this just leaves me cold. You know what, first off, I wouldn't do anything because it's never going to happen. I'll never be faced with the problem.
Now that's the word. I had a personal experience with the Lord, and the stage is not really important.
It's like a bad.
Of course, the Bible is a
It's like
Yeah.
a bad stand-up
Beast
comedian.
noble.
I
And
noticed
it is
the
full of rape and
description
slaughter and
is
incest.
Yes, I believe the
who
Bible.
deserve respect.
I believe who wrote it. I believe God inspired it. The Holy Spirit breathed upon these men, and I believe it because I want to. Okay.
Boy, you folks are crazy as hell.
Have you ever been tempted to turn to God and pray or pray to Him, but didn't because you are an atheist?
Never, never, because in the ordinary course of events, people meet things like I have met death. There has been death in my family. I myself was supposed to have died on several occasions, etc. But I always turn to a good doctor.
Yeah, wait. Just wait, Madeline. Just wait a few more years. You're going to be kidnapped and shot to death.
Yeah.
Or I turn to something like this, something that where assistance can be had, really, because prayer is only deluding of oneself. That's all, nothing else.
I'm 74 years old now. I'm diabetic, and I'm in really rotten health. And I hang on to life, for there is nothing else that I can do but hang on and fight. And I'll die too.
Okay, you think she's going to hell then?
I don't know. I would like to have faith to believe that she could be saved. I say this, if she is ever saved, she's from America over on here.
To be saved. I'm not
let me ask a
interested in
question.
your
Well, he
ideas.
gave you what you wanted, didn't he? He gave you exactly what you wanted.
No, of course
Yeah. Not only were you not saved, you were literally kidnapped by your hitman, and no one saved you. Shot you dead. You got exactly what you wanted.
And she got her daughter and son killed too.
Without religion. Religion has to be
Sad ending, man. I'm very
What was
sad.
the motive behind
There
the
is
shooting?
no.
She did not like. Well, you guys want to see a short documentary on it?
How did she get her
how long
son
is it?
killed?
I don't know. We'll see. Hold on.
If it's like 30 minutes, I'm cool with that.
Let's see. Let's see. Let's try this one.
She was murdered?
Yep.
By who?
She hated the idea of God, and which that carried over in a hatred toward the federal government. So she delighted in hiring ex-convicts to work at the American Atheist, the tiny organization that we have. Well, one of the last guys that she hired realized that they had like $300,000 or $400,000 in the bank. So he kidnapped them and told the son, "I'm going to kill your mother and sister unless you go to the bank, withdraw the money, and bring back gold coin."
I read a newspaper article about this missing family from Austin, Texas.
Tim called me, just cold called me and said, "I'm a private investigator. I find people for a living and I could really be helpful in finding Madam Mario O'Hare." The truth is there was no firm evidence of foul, and she'd been a really a pain in the butt for everybody in Austin for so long that I think the general feeling among everyone was good riddance.
It appeared to me that once they called her the most hated woman in America, she couldn't wait to prove why that was true.
She felt that religion was the most harmful idea that ever existed in history.
She sneered at Christians. She laughed at their faith and their belief in God.
You're very rude people, but that's expected from Christians.
A stream of profanity constantly came out of my mother's mouth. No matter what she was doing, she had been asked to leave restaurants. She was once asked to leave a truck stop.
I would love to know.
Defending truck.
I would love to know below the surface where all that hatred
She was asked to leave a truck stop.
a truck stop.
And people cuss like sailors in truck stops. They can use the truck stop.
He offended the truck drivers.
Well, she's just such a nasty woman, obviously.
Truck drivers.
I would just like to know what just motivated all that hatred. What in the world was it? Why did her parents hate her?
They hate the light because of
What was it?
their sin. Because of their sin, they hate the light. They do not come to light because their deeds are evil.
We
She
know
had
for a
motivation
fact.
to hate
We know for a
God.
fact from her son's testimony that when he was a young teenage boy, on a regular basis, she would go to the local porno movie theaters and have sexual contact and activity with men there, and she would come home and brag about it to her children. This is the kind of mentality that she had. Okay, she and this is a lot of atheists, certainly not all, but a lot of them have sexual proclivities which they don't like God looking down upon them. This is exactly what Christopher Hitchens said, right? When he was interviewed by, what was his name? The guy who does Wretched. What's his name? Who's the guy who does the Wretched TV and radio show? Oh, anyway.
Real.
Yeah. And we can play that, sometime the next day or two. But, he decries that, God is looking down upon us, that we're under surveillance. I mean, these people are they're so infantile in their reasoning. But let's just continue with this.
Very close. They lived together. They worked together. They were very insulated. Very insulated.
It's like 99% of their time was spent in each other's company.
I mean, look at it this way. They could have been exposed to something she didn't know about.
She would hire her employees very carefully, and she would browbeat them and keep them in subservient roles.
David Waters, at the age of 16, participated in the killing of a young man.
He had taken a can opener and just popped out one of his eyes while he was still alive, just to drive it home that he could make himself.
He was involved with his mother, where he almost killed his mother. He beat her with a broomstick, threw her down the stairs, and urinated on his mother.
He was the one, her fate, and the securing of her fame.
That to his own mother.
He walked in and got that job.
Was that the culprit? Mercenary, the killer himself? Was that the hitman she hired? They're talking about
right in front of.
Did anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Darth, we can't hear you either.
I was just asking, are they talking about the hitman she hired?
No, there wasn't. No. Yeah, they're talking about the guy, not the hitman, the murderer. Okay, he was the ex-convict that she hired, who he found out they had several $100,000 in a bank account. He then kidnapped her, told his son to go withdraw the money and get gold coins, and when he came back, he killed all of them. Right?
Yeah, and you can see from his mentality, from what they're just saying, that he probably did torture them.
He probably did.
Yeah.
In front of us the whole damn time.
He killed his own
Tim
mother.
and I quickly came
Peed
to
on her
believe
corpse.
that David Waters and several others had killed Bill O'Hare. So it really, for the first time, we had a coherent explanation. They weren't in New Zealand sitting on the beach. They weren't hiding in Germany. They were dead. When Waters and O'Hare clashed, this just set up the final showdown. They were more similar than they were different.
You've got to understand what David Waters knew right after Madeline hired him. That you don't need to commit the perfect crime to get away with kidnapping and murder. All you need are the perfect victims.
Yeah, she wanted a world where people's desires weren't restricted.
Wow.
And then when someone came and wanted to kill her, then
There's no audio,
she
Darth.
can't say he did anything wrong.
So what? Did he figure he would get away with murder by killing the most hated woman in America?
At the very end.
I don't know.
Oh, I just heard some.
All right, I'll just have to. Hold on.
It just ended.
It doesn't matter. Like only for like the last 30 seconds. It's not a big deal.
All right, let's see if it works now.
So, what year was her and her son and daughter killed? What year was it?
I don't remember.
Those are pretty interesting forensic files I put in the Atheist Helpline if anyone's interested. They go into a lot of details of the crime and how they were caught and the year it all happened, all that stuff. It's only like 20 minutes because all the commercials are out of it.
Interesting.
Boy, that was a rough day for her. She figured out that she was tortured to death, and then she found out there was a God.
Yeah, she found it the hard way.
There's not a more terrifying way to find out about God. You're terrified before you die, and you're all the more terrified when you meet God. It's just, I can't imagine that, man.
The eternity in hell ultimately, but the last part of her life might seem like a picnic in comparison to what she's facing for eternity.
Discusses The Atheist.
Is hell really for eternity?
Madeline Murray O'Hare. It's a biography of the woman who founded the American Atheists. This talk runs about an hour.
Welcome to the C-SPAN crew. Nice to have you with us, and welcome to all of you. That will be brief, and the other four perhaps a little longer. First of all, how did I come to write this book about Madeline Murray O'Hare? Secondly, who was she? Because most people know the name, but they get a little confused as to what exactly she did. Why did she do what she did, which became very important to me in my research? What was life like for Madeline Murray O'Hare after her most shining moment in 1963? And then how did she die? A fate that is still somewhat unclear in the minds of many people. So let's begin with that and start, first of all, by answering how I came to write this book. I'm an historian of American culture, and my various books have dealt with art and literature, forms at home and abroad, but by most measures, percentages of people who believe in God, who belong to particular church. Particular was my interest in the place of atheism, non-belief, unbelief in such a nation, and in particular, the role of atheism in the United States at a time period where religion was actually at its peak, when fervor was most intense.
Yeah, I'm going to fast forward some of this.
In the Superior Court of Baltimore, Maryland, asking the court to rule required Bible reading and recitation of the Lord's Prayer in the city's public services that led up to this. Consensus on many subjects, especially religion. The Supreme Being is committed to changing the world, to making it, by her way of thinking, a better, more humane place. Not entirely. There were some personal reasons for her behavior as well, and that takes us back really to her early life. And I would say that one thing that really helped me through this is I was the first, other than a few newspaper people, to actually have access to her diaries, which really did open up a whole new area of this exploration. Madeline was born, Madeline Evelyn Mays, on April 13th, 1919 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Madeline recalled, "I don't believe there could have been a happier or more secure childhood than mine." She described her mother as beautiful, her father as a knight in shining armor, and her life as growing up amidst affluence. Typically, the account was exaggerated, but Madeline did live a comfortable life as a child, at least until the Great Depression, when the stock market crash destroyed her father's business. And then for the next several years, the family moved from place to place while John Mays sought work and money to support his wife and children. Madeline often referred to those years and their influence on her later life. If once prosperous and carefree, that was no longer the case. Moreover, by her telling, the hardship she suffered bore the seeds of her later rejection of God. Her father was Presbyterian.
There it is right there. That tells the whole story. That's all I need to know.
Her mother was Lutheran. Her parents baptized Madeline in the Presbyterian church at the age of 4, and she attended church and Sunday school somewhat irregularly. Then at the age of 12 or 13, as Madeline tells it, while in the 6th grade,
You
What
see,
I'm getting from this,
many of these atheists, you can find out listening to them that they're disgruntled about something in their childhood. Okay.
yeah, what I'm getting from this is that she seemed to pride her parents to be very, very good people. And why would God allow the depression that they went through to happen to good people? Why would He allow that? Therefore, must be no God. And then that was the fertile soil for her anti-Christianity.
You know Michael Shermer?
Yep.
He used to believe in God, but when his girlfriend, aka or his fiance, died of cancer, that's when he became an atheist.
Living in Akron, Ohio, Madeline read the Bible. She read it cover to cover in one weekend, she later reported, and, quote, realized it was a perfectly bizarre book. She was completely appalled, totally turned off, and filled with repugnance by what she discovered. I came away stunned with the brutality, the sadomasochism, the cruelty, the killing, the ugliness. At about the same time, while attending church, she began to take note of the ministers accusing his flock of being full of sin, though he never explained why. Instead, they passed a collection plate. And I got in my mind that this had to do with the purification of the soul, that we were being invited to buy expiation for our sins. So I gave it all up. It was too nonsensical. The Mays were not enthusiastic churchgoers, as I mentioned earlier. Nevertheless, when Madeline explained her conclusions concerning the Bible to her parents and read them the offending passages, her mother simply drew herself up and responded, "That's not in my Bible." Madeline was not to be dissuaded, however. I never accepted the Bible after that day. I refused to go to Sunday school anymore, and I refused to go to church. The Mays family may have been poor as a result of the Depression, but in 1936, Madeline was able to spend 1 year at the University of Toledo. In 1938-39, she enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh. When the family returned to that city, but she did not graduate. Instead, on October 9th, 1941, at age 22, she eloped with John Henry Roths, a steelworker, a local guy who Madeline had met in high school. 2 months later, the Roths' marriage was disrupted by American involvement in World War II. Both enlisted, but received separate assignments. He became a Marine and was sent to the Pacific. She enlisted in the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps and was commissioned as a second lieutenant. She served on the cryptographic staff in the Supreme Allied Headquarters in North Africa, France, and Italy. While stationed in Italy, Lieutenant Madeline Roths met and conceived a child with William Murray Jr., an officer in the U.S. 8th Army Corps. According to their sons, when Madeline returned home from the war, her parents were living in a shack with no electricity or running water. Her father had spent on booze all the money she had sent for savings. The family.
Does everybody see the common thread that runs through a lot of atheists?
Yep.
Can you explain it?
Everything makes sense.
It's very common, although not ubiquitous, that atheists have certain things in their past or their childhood that they're very upset about. Okay, either it's some type of a tragedy, or it's that they themselves are living lifestyles, if you will, that is contrary to if God is looking over their shoulders. Okay? And they don't want to acknowledge God, they become bitter, and then they turn to denying God. And she's a prime example of this commonality. Is it true of all atheists? No, but it's extremely common that there's some type of conflict early on in life, sometimes with parents, sometimes with other family members, and they're disgruntled about certain things. Right? So she was disgruntled about her parents, the depression. She went off. She was screwing with another guy, had a child out of wedlock. You know, her parents were living in a shack. Her father was an alcoholic.
Family was destitute. She was pregnant. When Roth returned, he offered to stay with his wife and raise the child as his own, but O'Hare declined and proceeded to sue for divorce. According to Madeline, Murray, the father of the child, refused to leave his wife because he was a Catholic and opposed to divorce. But he actually denied he was the father, forcing Madeline to establish his paternity in court.
Yeah, I got to play that back again. I missed it.
When Madeline returned, her son William, when Madeline returned home from the war, her parents were living in a shack with no electricity or running water. Her father had spent on booze all the money she had sent for savings. The family was destitute. She was pregnant. When Roth returned, he offered to stay with his wife and raise the child as his own, but O'Hare declined and proceeded to sue for divorce. According to Madeline, Murray, the father of the child, refused to leave his wife because he was a Catholic and opposed to divorce. But he actually denied he was the father, forcing Madeline to establish his paternity in court in order to receive child support. Although William Murray's refusal to divorce his wife cannot be ascribed then solely to his being a Catholic, his son concluded that it provoked his mother's antagonism toward Roman Catholicism, which was always her prime enemy, and God, the latter symbolized by one of the most dramatic episodes in Madeline's life.
As much as I disagree with Catholicism, that's just her whining and griping. So because he was consistent with his beliefs about Catholicism, she vented her frustration against Catholicism because of it. Okay.
One night in early 1946, during a violent electrical storm, Madeline, still pregnant and in despair, announced that she was going out in the storm to challenge God to strike her and her unborn child dead with lightning bolts. She stood in the rain, waving her fist, cursing God, and when nothing happened, she went back into the house and said, "You see, if God exists, he would surely have taken up my challenge. I've proved irrefutably that God does not exist."
Boy, is she stupid. What a psycho.
I wonder if the unborn child was the son that got shot along with her, later on down the road.
In all likelihood, it was because no. It was excuse me. It was William. Okay, that was William, the one who became a Christian.
When she did that, waving her fist in the air, God said, "Challenge accepted. Just wait."
Just wait, Madeline. I'll send somebody by to take care of you.
Madeline attempted to rebuild her life. She graduated from Ashland College in 1948 and from South Texas School of Law in 1952. In 1952, John May's sister-in-law invited him to join her family's business in Baltimore, Maryland. They bought a small brick row house at 1526 Winford Road in a quiet middle-class neighborhood, and Madeline began her diary, in which she voiced some guarded optimism for the future. On January 5th, 1953, as her first entry, she wrote, "The year has the look and the feel of a good one. Well-paced, eventful, prosperous." She nevertheless listed several issues that gave her pause and even presented a dismal foundation on which to build, so she wrote. To begin with, she found that the Maryland bar examiners did not recognize her law degree because South Texas Law School had not yet been accredited, so she couldn't take the bar exam. Second, the family continued to be in financial difficulties. Madeline reported that her former employer had written a condemning note to the public department.
I can't imagine why he would have done that. Why in the world would he write such a horrible thing about that sweet thing?
Public welfare, for whom she wanted to work, and that she had been forced to take a job at the Glen L. Martin Company instead. She hated the job. And as months passed, even this level of Madeline's optimism slowly waned and her frustration grew. The family's financial situation improved only slightly, and she felt trapped by her job and frustrated by her life. She observed in her diary, I don't like these row houses, nests of bees, identical homes with identical people and identical lives. Yet truly, I long to be part of society. I would like to have a routine, humdrum existence, or so I've thought, a set of contradictions, if there ever was one. Madeline had moments of renewed optimism and satisfaction, but generally the remaining years of the decade, as reflected in her diary, were marred by even greater despair and anger, both with herself and the world around her. She condemned her own laziness and mistakes, but she also condemned the society in which she lived for the situation in which she found herself at that point. On May 16, 1953, she confided to her diary, "There's nothing for me ahead but a petty existence eked out from day to day. I'm frustrated and bitter and full of hate."
Surprise, surprise.
There it is. There it is.
There it is. There it is.
Madeline also commented on world and national events, again in an increasingly critical manner. She grew highly critical of Joseph McCarthy, Richard Nixon, and the anti-communist movement. She joined Americans for Democratic Action, then the Socialist Labor Party, and then the Socialist Workers' Party. Madeline became an early proponent of feminism and an opponent of French and American involvement in Vietnam. She opposed the Korean War, the testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, and suppression of the rights of Algerians and Black South Africans, and a proponent of improving the lot of migrant workers. But Madeline couldn't live by politics alone. On July 3rd, 1953, she wrote in her diary, "I need to unlock again my emotions. I need to love. I've been pent up and hard and cynical too long. I need to be a woman." Soon thereafter, Madeline began seeing Michael Fiorillo from New York City, whom she met at work. She confided to her diary that she felt like a high school girl again. "He folded me into his arms and naturally and completely kissed me, like I have wanted to be kissed for 20 years. I was so absolutely pleased and surprised, I almost got kittenish." Interesting image from Madeline O'Hare. On November 16, 1954, Madeline gave birth to her second out-of-wedlock child, whom she married John Garth Murray, after the father of her first son. Fiorillo challenged his paternity of John Garth, but lost. Again, I would remind you, this is the 1950s. Madeline also ruminated about her social situation. "I say I have bad luck. But don't we make our luck? Isn't it a combination of poor judgment and indiscretion?" Then there's a pause and a very key transition. "I don't really believe that. Why do I write it? I see social mores that are wrong, stupid, and immoral. The people who live by the mores see me as a flagrant violator, an extremist, something foreign to them and dangerous." By the early months of 1955, Madeline hit absolute bottom, but she refused to be counted out, as there was no place to go but up. She attacked the moral code inculcated in school, church, and other institutions. She explained that she ignored the code completely and lived by raw rules that disgust, revolt, and injure. Everyone is playing a horrible game of lip service versus the darkest and most cruel conduct in dead earnestness. It's macabre and hysterically funny. These dark games are dangerous, and men die for false ideals and distorted truths and will forever and ever. Amen. The question, she continued, was how to resolve yourself to this insane situation. The answer, she suggested, to reject it. Indeed, to topple it. "Consequently, I will be ostracized," she wrote, "by my own volition from society henceforth, and since I've decided, I'm rather happy about it." Although she would waver in her commitment from time to time, Madeline was committed to a life of confrontation with American society. What she needed was a cause. Madeline might have committed herself to any number of causes: her feminism, nuclear disarmament, social reform, political activism. Atheism was neither her only, nor even really at this point her primary concern. As the decade drew to a close, Madeline contemplated how she would sort of translate this into an action against the world. And she began to think about, first of all, leaving the country. She thought about renouncing her citizenship and even the possibility of defecting to the Soviet Union. But she abandoned that idea and resolved to focus her energy on reforming the United States. That idea, and she then decided she would enroll at Howard University, a traditionally black institution, seeking a master's degree in psychiatric work, but she was expelled after quarreling with her advisor. Madeline found a job in the Social Security Administration, but was fired. And during the spring and summer of 1959, for about 3 months, she moved to an
How in the
apartment
world
with a
was she
man
fired
called...
from a government job? She couldn't even hack it in a government job.
She was an a-hole. That's why. She was a bitter, angry person. She couldn't get along with people.
Yeah. There's a verse in Isaiah that says that there's no peace for the wicked, saith the Lord. And the joy is of the Lord, and she didn't have any peace. She didn't have joy. Bitter person.
Give me a second here. I got to fix my headset. Somebody say something. Okay, there we go.
That is just so interesting.
Yeah, these traits are very common in the history of atheists. Many of them are motivated by tragedies or bitterness, immorality.
Did this woman mock Jesus?
What?
Did this woman mock Jesus?
Don't you know who she is?
No.
That's not even the half of it, dude. Not even close.
This is Madalyn Murray O'Hair, the most famous atheist in American history.
Yeah, I'm not from America, so...
Okay, what I would suggest you do is, well, in American history, she was the most famous, obnoxious atheist.
Ricardo. She left her sons in the care of her parents, admitted that her family wasn't happy with their decision. She hoped all would be reconciled in time, but the relationship failed, and she moved back home again. This is when she took on the Baltimore public schools. When they moved to Baltimore, Madeline enrolled William in Park School, a private school, which then moved to West Baltimore. And William had to commute to the school. After a semester of an exhausting long commute and a struggle to meet the tuition bills, she decided to switch him to the local public school. William, as they passed through the halls of Woodbourne Junior High, his mother was perturbed to see the students standing and pledging allegiance to the flag, and angry when she observed them bowing their head and reciting the Lord's Prayer. Upon entering the counselor's office, Madeline confronted the man who greeted her, asking why the students were praying. It's un-American. It's unconstitutional.
This is public school too.
And let him know that she did not
things
want
have changed.
to be taught any prayers. The man was clearly flustered by Madeline's charge, and at first responded by noting that nobody else had ever complained, and that even those who were not very religious thought prayer recitation set a nice tone for the day. After he regained his composure, he added, there were prayers in the school of the city before there was a United States of America. If our forefathers had wanted us to stop this practice, they would have told us that when they formed this government. His response infuriated Madeline. He probably should have stopped there. She informed the counselor that people like him had to be stopped, whereupon he replied, then why don't you sue us?
Oh, so he thoroughly
could not have
refuted her. She
anticipated
didn't
what
like
he had
it.
suggested, to be sure.
She got made a fool of it. She didn't like it.
October 27th, 1960, the face of William Murray graced page 1 of the Baltimore Morning Sun beneath the headline, Boy 14 balks at Bible reading. The 3-column article reported the facts of the case. A challenge to the Baltimore School Board's rule on prayer since its adoption in 1905. Telephone calls began immediately, first from local reporters, then national reporters, all seeking interviews. On November 2nd, 1960, Maryland Attorney General C. Ferdinand Seibert ruled that objections to exercises were not a valid reason for noncompliance with the public school law, and that anyone who absented himself from school to avoid them could be prosecuted for truancy. Seibert recommended that pupils who objected to Bible reading or school prayer be allowed to remain silent upon the written request of their parents, or be excused from the exercise. He acknowledged that such nonconformity would cause individual embarrassment, but that was the price to be paid for nonconformity. Now, there was a little bit for everybody in this ruling. The morning religious exercises remained, but the Murrays won the right to absent William from it. Madeline, however, viewed the decision as almost total victory for the school board and would not compromise. She pressed on. The Murrays' attorney filed a petition for a writ of mandamus on December 8, 1960, in the Superior Court of Baltimore. The case, initially called William J. Murray III versus Baltimore School Board, became Murray v. Curlett being the school board president. On April 27, 1961, Judge Gilbert Prendergast dismissed the Murrays' petition, and the Murrays appealed the decision to the Maryland Court of Appeals, and that court ruled against the Murrays as well. And finally, the Murrays appealed the case to the United States Supreme Court, where it was joined with Schempp, the case I mentioned earlier, which came out of Pennsylvania, where the state court actually ruled that the state law was unconstitutional. So it was an interesting joining of cases. On June 17, 1963, the U.S. Supreme Court returned the Murray and Schempp cases. The court declared unconstitutional the Maryland and Pennsylvania laws requiring Bible reading and prayer recitation in the public schools because they violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The majority opinion maintained that the Establishment Clause is violated by any government sponsorship of religion in the public schools, regardless of whether a showing of coercion exists. This was a reference to the letting William have the opportunity to leave the room. As Justice Tom Clark put it, for a law to be valid, there must be a secular legislative purpose and a primary effect that neither advances nor inhibits religion. And the Maryland and Pennsylvania laws failed that test. Madeline Murray felt vindicated by the decision, and she basked in the sunlight of public and media attention. She vowed to go beyond removing prayer and Bible reading from the nation's public schools. But as had been the case throughout her adult life, she was not without her personal second thoughts. She continually struggled to understand herself and her seemingly uncontrollable need to challenge and change some of the most dearly held beliefs in the world around her.
Have you noticed that he hasn't even mentioned her sexual proclivities that her son talked about? See, not mentioned.
What do you mean?
Her oldest son, who I believe is still alive, who became a Christian, said his mother would come home when he was a young teenager and would brag about her sexual exploits at the local porno theater. Okay? But he doesn't mention that. Okay?
Several years after the cases were decided, she described one such contemplative moment. One evening in Baltimore, as she sat alone in her basement library trying to decide whether to press ahead with her lawsuit, Madeline reflected on her sense of separateness. When we first moved into those row houses in Baltimore, she wrote, I think I had picked out one for purchase deliberately in the hopes that I could be like everyone else. I had wanted so desperately to fit in. But I could not engage in conversation about which bleach was the whitest for the wash. I never gave a damn about chlorophyll and toothpaste. The idiotic idea of back fence visiting left me completely cold. She acknowledged that none of her work had ever fully occupied her mind and thinking processes, and that out of frustration, she would too often pace the basement library floor like a lioness caged, the wrap of loneliness, of aloneness, always around me. I just wanted one person somewhere, sometime to understand me. been argued that the singular importance of Murray v. Curlett was the involvement of Madalyn Murray, who seized the opportunity to attain national notoriety as the leader of the American atheist movement. When the newspapers reported on the Murray-Schempp decision, Madalyn, William, and John Garth were pictured standing on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court building. The Schempps were nowhere to be found. Soon, every newspaper, magazine, and radio and television commentator in the land referred to her as the woman who brought the case that removed prayer and Bible reading from the schools. And Madalyn resented any attempt to limit her responsibility in those cases. She laid claim to being the primary figure in the 1963 Supreme Court decision by arguing that Edward Schempp, in his failure to seize the moment and lead the movement for separation of church and state, forfeited that role. 40 years after she initiated the case, 4 years after her mysterious disappearance, the Washington Post made the point that the Murrays were neither the only plaintiffs involved in the 63 Supreme Court ruling, but they weren't even essential. Madalyn, however, it added, was the litigant with the loudest mouth, and it made her a celebrity. One of the early major published exposés on Madalyn Murray appeared in Life magazine in 1964. Life used as its title, "The Most Hated Woman in America," making it household currency. Author Jane Howard described Madalyn as America's most outspoken and militant atheist. Her cause was the total and utter separation of church and state. In a land where most people believe in God and those who don't keep quiet, Howard wrote, such a cause is as good a way to win public favor as bringing back polio. Murray, she added, which outlawed official prayer ceremonies in public schools and made the name of Murray anathema to millions of Americans. Madalyn agreed with Howard's assessment and made note of the death threats she had received. Madalyn said that she loved life, but that she simply had to fight what she knew in her guts was wrong. She quipped, I think sooner or later, some night, some nut's going to get a message from Jesus Christ and I'm going to have had it. But as long as I'm still around, I'm going to keep on being a squeaking wheel. Now, I don't have time to go into her life after Murray in any great detail, but let me just comment on it briefly because I think it's important. Madalyn Murray issued her challenge to the Baltimore public schools during the Cold War. This helps explain the public reaction to her protest against prayer in the public schools and the outrage at her success. Indeed, although it made her the most hated woman in America, it also made her one of the best known. And it gave her a cause that would serve her well during the quite different reform-minded, countercultural, even iconoclastic late.
It not only gave her a cause, it gave her a base for it being lucrative. Okay? She could then make her living off of championing atheism.
Late 1960s and 1970s. It was during those years that Madalyn Murray O'Hair, as head of American Atheists and Society for the Separation of Church and State, reached her peak of popularity and influence. She and her organizations challenged the words "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance, "In God We Trust" on American currency, the tax-exempt status of religious organizations, the use of chaplains in the military and open sessions of government, the Pope's performance of Mass on the Washington Mall, U.S. astronauts reading the Bible in space, and much more. The list goes on. She lost most of her cases, but as she readily admitted, she never expected to win, at least in the short run. What she sought was to make cases for what she saw as violations of constitutional provisions for the separation of church and state, and the rights of atheists, as well as what she saw as the destructive, oppressive power of religion in America, in the most visible manner, to educate Americans really on these matters for the future. She believed that although a fervent minority believed in and defended this unofficial de facto establishment of religion, most did not or didn't care, not seeing the danger of it, and therefore could be persuaded to oppose it. And for a time during the 1960s and 70s, O'Hare was one of the most visible reformers in America. She was on every major TV and radio talk show. Her face was on the cover of every leading magazine. Her actions were covered regularly in the press. The FBI had a file on her. When I wrote that, I realized that they had a file on everybody, so that wasn't any great accomplishment. Death threats against her were a common occurrence, and she often had to be hustled away under guard when her public remarks incited crowds to menacing levels. But then the times changed again. The Cold War reheated during the Reagan years, complete with renewed ideological crusades against the evil empire and turning a cold shoulder to liberals, reformers, and those standing outside the new ideological mainstream. The more conservative mood of the nation, the fact that much of what people found so shocking and appealing about O'Hare and her cause during the previous decades became old hat, and the errors made on her own part all precipitated O'Hare's gradual decline. O'Hare roared in opposition to the Reagan decade, but she was tilting with windmills, especially when those to whom she once appealed tired of the battle for liberal reform and might well have been heard to respond, "Madeline, we've heard it before." As O'Hare lived into her mid-60s and once again faced issues she thought long ago resolved, she increasingly despaired and spoke of ill health and being exhausted. She rallied at times in challenging the new Christian right and allied forces mustered to drag the nation back into the dark ages, as she saw it. But then her son, William Murray, in whose name she brought the case, defected, was born again, and became her enemy. The press had a field day with the turn of events, and its coverage of American atheist activities was limited to periodic confrontations between the two groups, portrayed much like the carnival come to town, complete with sideshows and other attractions at which to marvel or laugh, but certainly not to take seriously. As O'Hare prepared to retire, her American Atheist faced its most serious challenge since its inception. When O'Hare rose to prominence, she attracted people to her and expanded her operation. She also became increasingly dictatorial. She had no patience with those of lesser skills and energy, or who challenged or even questioned her. And as a result, she alienated many of those who might have served her organization well. This was not a significant problem as long as she had the limelight. It became a problem as she lost that prominence and members of her own organization began to blame her for the decline of the movement and sought to remove her from power. Others simply sensed, no doubt, her growing weakness and moved in for the kill for their own reasons. Trusting no one beyond her immediate circle, O'Hare insisted on passing the baton to her son, John Garth Murray. His leadership and interpersonal skills were questionable, and the method by which he was thrust into power outraged many within the national organization. Combined with its mounting financial problems on the eve of Madeline, John, and Robin Murray's disappearance in 1995, American Atheists seemed on the verge of being torn apart, if not collapsing altogether. But Madeline Murray O'Hare's life ended on a much more bizarre note. On August 28, 1995, Madeline, John, and Robin Murray, Robin was Madeline's granddaughter, who was actually William's daughter, estranged, disappeared. Speculation arose that Madeline had died and that John and Robin had secreted her body away for cremation and burial out of the public eye, as Madeline had requested. Some believed that the trio had fled the country due to their financial problems, absconding with whatever organization monies remained. This interpretation stuck, by the way. I just got off the net. There's a production opening in New York at the Wash and Fold Theater Project. I'm from New York, and that's a new one on me. And it's called The Last Days of Madeline Murray O'Hare in Exile. And what it has is Madeline Murray O'Hare absconding with the money, living on a South Sea island, and going through sort of rethinking her whole life. So this interpretation appealed to a lot of people. And of course, a few thought they had been murdered by some irate Christer, as she put it, whom Madeline predicted all along would kill her. Indeed, the trio had been murdered, but not by a Christer. Instead, they were killed by an ex-con and former employee whom Madeline once charged with theft of organization funds. David Waters entered a plea of guilty in that case in exchange for probation and was ordered to make restitution. He also vowed revenge, a vow he kept. Waters and two accomplices abducted the trio, forced them to withdraw over $500,000 from the organization's bank accounts, killed them, dismembered their bodies, and buried them in shallow graves outside San Antonio, Texas. In January 2001, Waters, once again in a plea bargain, led authorities to those graves where the remains were recovered. William Murray claimed and buried them without prayer in an undisclosed location in the hills near Austin. Well, let me conclude by just talking a little bit about
Did you hear that? Madeline Murray O'Hare was buried in the hills where? Anyone? Bueller?
Austin?
Austin. What is Austin known for in terms of atheist circles? Anyone?
Austin Atheist Community.
The the Atheist Church of Austin. So the ghost of Madeline Murray O'Hare lingers in the hills.
Madeline's
Interesting
legacy.
thing is she became the biggest hypocrite. She was pushing her not God worldview onto everyone else, starting a big religious organization. It's so crazy how she was just a hypocrite in what she's doing.
I'm just surprised that he glossed over her sexual immorality when her son was young. I know there's limited time in his speech here, so I shouldn't be too hard on him.
Or at least her legacy continues to challenge us to this day. Many Americans, still refusing to accept the Supreme Court's ruling in Murray, continue to seek creative and constitutionally acceptable ways around that decision. And other challenges that Madeline brought but failed to win continue to be brought up, the most recent being the case brought by Michael Newdow on behalf of his 8-year-old daughter to the...
There's another nut job. You guys know who Michael Newdow is?
Yeah.
He's a graduate of medical school, and he also graduated from law school, and he's kind of like a male version of Madeline Murray O'Hare.
To the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco, which resulted in a ruling that the words "under God" were unconstitutional when uttered by teachers leading school children in their morning exercises. In the midst of dying telecoms, charges of corruption lodged against major corporations, an exploding deficit, a Middle East in flames, the decision still set off such an uproar that the judge in the case, Alfred Goodwin, felt obliged to block his own ruling until a higher court had a chance to hear the case. And I really think Madeline would have been much amused if she'd been around at that point. Thank you. Then later on, she kind of decided, well, that's not where we want to go, because she thought the tone of the court was changing. So she changed her focus to start all her cases at the local level, saying we can change things here. And she was very dramatic about going into, she lived in Austin, Texas, so she would go into the Austin City Council chambers and demand that they not pray before, the session. This was her feeling that grassroots kind of behavior was the way to go. So she did bring all of these cases. Now, she never took the bar exam, and so she could never practice law. She could never sign or represent herself in that sense. She always had attorneys who worked for her to do it. But by all measures, all references, sometimes angrily by her attorneys, she insisted on writing many of the briefs herself. She would write them and have them sign it. If they tried to change anything, she'd just sort of tear it out of their hands and say, "You're done." And that was the end of it. So she did write many of them herself. And they are really written I would recommend many of the statements, the briefs that were entered in the Murray case, I think are the best representation of atheism in America that you're going to get. They're really very good.
Before I came tonight, I was talking with somebody about your book, and they said Madalyn Murray O'Hair gave atheists a bad name. Did she catch much heat from within the movement to tone it down and try to become more, mom and pop atheism?
Right. That's a good question. And it kind of relates back to Maura's question earlier, when she talked about her being one of many liberals of the time. Her behavior was such that other liberals, if we can call her a liberal, and almost so many people in her movement rejected her because she was just so studiedly crude and vulgar that people just wouldn't have anything to do with her. At first, they were okay. Through much of the 60s, because that was kind of a crazy time anyway, and everyone was acting bad. It was easy, in a sense, for Madalyn. She had lots of cover for her behavior. As you go into the late 70s and in the 80s, in a more civil time, if you want, you can take that as a positive or negative view of the time, people really began to just reject her. And whenever she was rejected, she tended to be even more outrageous in her behavior. One typical scene, and it comes, she had a great way of mimicking so people wouldn't miss the point. She went into a bingo game in a church and did the Christ thing from the New Testament, went in and tipped over the tables and started screaming at the top of her lungs in order to make the point. This was sort of typical. And many people did distance themselves from her. So.
Many times the Americans who are perceived in their own country are admired and revered abroad. For example, Woody Allen in France, Marilyn Monroe, Jerry Lewis, Roman Polanski. Well, he was a European, though. Do you have any information about how she was accepted abroad? Chastised here, an outsider, but was she respected elsewhere?
She actually started the International Atheist Association. She started it herself. And she was fairly well regarded abroad. She tended to behave a little better when she went abroad. And I think that helped too. And also, people were less obsessed with atheists in the movement abroad. So she could go, as she did, to Sweden, Denmark, India, France, many places, and meet with atheists, and no one really cared. It didn't bring about the reaction that it did in the United States. So she didn't have that kind of visibility. But she seems to have been fairly highly regarded, enough to be elected the president of that group for several years. So she did pretty well abroad.
I have a question to go back to the diaries. I'm always interested in documentation of scholarship and so on. How did you gain access to the diaries? And did you have access to documents that the American atheists keep, or even documents of her enemies and so forth?
Let me answer the first question about the diaries. The diaries were, when they were found, were actually sold at an auction to help pay off the organization's debts. They were purchased by an attorney from Austin, and it took me about a year to persuade him, for reasons which I'm still not quite sure, to let me read the diaries, and I'm very grateful. I did not intend to include much of Madalyn's personal life in this book. I really wanted to look at atheism in Cold War America as an issue, with Madalyn as a representation of that issue. Most of the stuff that had been written about Madalyn was pretty antagonistic. And what I found from my research, most of it was wrong. And that's why I had to, in a sense, retreat. And I was also constantly challenged by this idea of, why did she do it? And it really took the diaries to help me figure that out. Also purchased as part of the diaries were many boxes of personal documents from her life, which was another one. Birth certificates. That's another story. Read the chapter in the book on birth certificates, because she she would have one birth certificate for her son, William, which was probably the original one. Then she went and had a second one done with different names. And she did the same thing when her second son was born. And she was constantly playing, if you will, these kinds of games. But the documentation is really, there's quite a bit. Now, as far as American atheists are concerned, I was not very successful. They were very protective of her. I think I would have had better luck if she hadn't disappeared when I was writing the book. And then they were under such siege, thinking that she'd absconded with the money, that they sort of drew up the drawbridge and decided they weren't going to let anyone near that documentation. However, having said that, it worked out okay because really there isn't much personal material at American Atheist. There's a lot of literature. It's a wonderful collection on atheism. Madeline collected it, but there wasn't a lot of personal papers. One thing about Madeline, Madeline wrote everything down and got it published. She had newsletters, she had magazines, she had a radio show, and then published the transcripts of the radio shows. So there wasn't much that Madeline thought or said that didn't make it into print. So, yes.
If I can follow on that question, was Madeline spiritual at all? Did she believe in spirituality? And in examining her diaries, do you perceive at all over time any kind of spiritual or even emotional growth going on?
Oh, interesting ending to that question. I didn't detect very much of anything in terms of a spiritual understanding. There's just nothing there to deal with. She was a committed, as she believed, rationalist who just didn't believe in any kind of spiritual focus or force in the world. I didn't see very much there at all. And I think, if anything, rather than looking at it in terms of spiritual growth, I think, if anything, whatever spiritual feeling she might have had were lost over time. She died, or in her last few, she was a very, very bitter, angry woman at the end.
You mentioned in Europe that she could become well-behaved. I wonder, was there anything endearing or soft about this woman, or was it a show? I mean, understanding a little bit about the atheist leaders now in the organizations, it's a plethora of people being shunned and splitting off, and so it seems more normal to me. So I was just wondering, is this harshness just part of a show, or?
I think to a large extent it was. It was her performance so that she would be noticed. But she was a pretty outspoken woman. And even those who liked her said that in private she was pretty tough to be around. She didn't tolerate fools well at all. And if you said something she didn't agree with, she let you know. There was no question. On the other hand, they say she had a fabulous sense of humor. And could be fun to be around. But those people were pretty few and far between. I think the frustration came out, with her over the years. Now, you mentioned Europe. I think one of the reasons, again, I want to emphasize that I believe that she was better behaved in Europe is because she didn't have the spotlight to misbehave. They didn't care that she was there. So there's another atheist group. It just wasn't a big issue in Europe. One of the things that kind of ignited her in the United States was that wherever she went, the spotlight was on her, and she would seize it by behaving the way she did. I suppose she could have engaged in some outrageous behavior abroad, but she just didn't. It wasn't there.
In your reading of her diaries and in your discussion of that early period of her life and her own comment about, I believe it was in a later period of her life where she wondered to herself why she always wanted to be angry and against something. It sounded as though you might be implying that she was, or portraying her as a rebel with the cause, by nature, that was her sort of fundamental personality bent, and further that perhaps more than anything, more than particular rational beliefs, might be what was driving her. And I just wonder if you would comment further on that, if that is what you're implying in the book, and if she ever herself seemed to, if that is the case, did she ever herself seem to come to some kind of an self-understanding about what was making her tick in terms of why she needed to be always against something to thrive?
Yeah, clearly there was a rebellious nature there, and she knew it. I think to a certain extent, anyone in that situation must have had moments of loneliness when she wished she wasn't the way that she was. Because she led, they had a pretty desperate life. I didn't go into it, but the 2 or 3 years after the Murray case, she had to have guards. Her house was stoned, windows broken, tires slashed, her sons were beat up, William was thrown before a bus. It was pretty tough going, and I'm sure that she had moments when she wished things were different. But I think she was either put herself into a situation where she had nothing else that she could do but fight back. And one could put a gendered interpretation of what's going on, but I really do see this as a woman in the early 50s, very bright, very well educated, who made some mistakes and never got over it, and decided rather than apologizing for it, she was going to pull the system down around her. I really think that was a lot of the motivation. So.
What a charming woman.
Oh, I missed it. What was the video about?
Madalyn Murray O'Hair, peace be upon her. May her soul rot in hell forever.
Oh, Darth, I sent you Madalyn Murray O'Hair. I sent you Vern Poythress defining God as, I think, the ultimate or something like that. And I thought, oh, Darth will like this.
All right, I'll go listen to it. Well, it's just a screenshot.
Well, we will see how she feels when she will be resurrected at the Judgment Day.
No, she already knows it already. One So I see Vern Poitras took notes when I taught him that God was ultimate.
That's great. Wow, that was really good. I said, wow. So these atheists that are saying that's not a good definition of God. No, I guess it's fundamental.
Well, it's even better than supreme, because you could be supreme but wouldn't constitute ultimate. And I like how Van Til says it. I don't remember where he says it. I don't know if it was whether Bonson said it, but to be ultimate means that you have to be unconditionally non-dependent, and anything else must entirely depend and derive from what is ultimate. Otherwise, if there's something coexisting in eternity, then you're not ultimate.
Why did you say that somebody took notes?
Well, because Voin Poitras was a student of mine.
I love that.
I don't even. Okay.
It's a joke. Voin Poitras is a theologian and a close colleague of John Frame.
Oh,
And the Mr. Brojo interviewed him, and he used the U word, ultimate. He used that slippery word.
And what happened?
Well, now, did the atheist say that was really? He said it was slippery. Wow.
Look! He was just being deceptive and slimy himself.
He was
Okay?
double glazing.
He was double glazing.
As a matter of fact, he had already put on 2 layers of glaze, and he was going for a third and a fourth.
Actually, what he was doing was he was gaslighting. Okay,
gaslighting.
Well, I'm not trying to be funny when I say that. Okay, what he was doing was a form of trolling. Right? If we use a more expanded definition of trolling, rather than trying to simply to inflame passages, he was just being disingenuous and deceitful and trying to escape my question.
Right.
It was sort of like a variation on the definition game. Right? Instead of asking what the definition of word is, you say, that word's, but after they give the definition, you say, it's so slippery. It's
so slippery. Vern Poitras is using it. PhD at Yale. Oh gosh, these people.
There was nothing slippery about it. He was looking to find fault and to find some excuse to be evasive, deceptive, and not answer the question.
And the ticket is, right, that if you throw out that it's slippery, and then your opponent gets distracted and says, it's not slippery, well, then you can burn 5 to 10 minutes, right, off the clock by arguing about whether it's slippery or not. And worst case scenario, you just say, oh, my mistake. It wasn't slippery.
Well, you have to understand that the Dr. Professor Stephen Law went to the Destiny School of Distraction.
Yeah.
By the way, Destiny, I heard, destroyed you in that debate.
Yeah. I left limping.
Which debate was that?
I mean, where did he get his?
You're breaking up.
Where did Stephen Law get his degree?
Oh, probably from a UK institution.
Okay.
Or I might be wrong about it. He might be Australian.
We have said God is ontologically basic, and the way in which he is ontologically basic is not pantheistically identical with the world. But by being God, he created the world, and the way in which he is ontologically basic is by being Trinitarian God, which does not come into the discussion when philosophers are talking about substance. The word substance links us up with the age-long discussion of philosophers. Sorry, I'm looking at Poetry starts explaining the difference, what it means to be ontologically basic. Now you said that supreme is not the same as ultimate. Is that semantics or?
Well, yes and no. In dictionary definitions, sometimes they might refer to God as the supreme being. Now, if God is ultimate, then by default he will be supreme. But in the way that I look at it, one could be the supreme being, but not ultimate. You could be the most intelligent. You could be the most powerful. But that doesn't mean that everything derives and depends upon you. You're just as one wise man said it, the final boss.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Let's see. I'm looking through Poitras' book on the Trinity now. Oh, he does deal with covenantal relations. Look at that. That's 4:3. Hmm.
Hey, Brocho.
Yes, Parakeet. What may I do for you?
You were hot micing.
Oh, thank you. All right, Parakeet. Let me handle this.
No atheist tonight?
Well, we've been listening to a man who wrote a biography of Madeline Murray O'Hare. We were listening for the last 45 minutes or so, the story of her life in brief.
Now, who was Madeline Murray O'Hare?
Madeline Murray O'Hare was the most famous atheist in U.S. history, and she founded American Atheists. She was involved in lawsuits that helped remove prayer from the public schools. But what I didn't know was her particular case was not instrumental, but was a part of an assortment of collective cases that were brought before the court to remove it. So she got far more credit than she actually deserved. But she was a loudmouth. She was vulgar. She was obscene. She was profane.
Like Parakeet?
No. He's just
I'm the toxic Avenger, sir.
He's
You'll
just
address me by
toxic.
my title, or you won't address me at all, okay?
The TA, the toxic adventure. I'll never. It never ceases to amaze me what jerks we run into. Okay, and then the atheists think I'm a bad guy because I get angry because people troll and
You know, I remember what was it? You used to call Matt the grandstander. Oh no. Who called Matt the grandstander first? That was so funny. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. There we go. Madeline Murray. Oh wow, she was on. Oh wow, she looked vicious.
Oh yeah, she was. She was a nasty person.
She was a nasty woman.
Did she get murdered?
Oh, yes.
No way.
Oh, yeah. Yes way.
Oh gosh, that's terrible. Let me see. That's terrible. What happened? She just disappeared?
Look, she delighted in hiring ex-convicts to work at American Atheists. And the last one she hired was a guy she never should have hired. He had a terrible history. And he did him in.
Wow. Wow. That's terrible. That's a horrible thing. Hit me, Dorothy.
Dougie, why are you pictured there with a young chickie poo? Are you there, Dougie?
I'm hot miking.
Yeah, it seems like it's a hobby of yours.
Are you taking jabs at me right now, Parakeet?
No, I'm just taking note of whenever there's random sounds coming through the mic. You know.
Oh, by the way, didn't I see a picture of you where you have AirPod Pros in your ears?
Yeah, they are AirPod Pros.
Well, I'm getting
Yeah.
some the day after. I'm getting some on Saturday.
Yeah, the AirPod Pros are fantastic. You have to use it with spatial audio. I mean, it's almost like a theater in your home with just.
Well, that
they have-
I really don't use. I rarely, if ever, use them in both ears. I just use them for phone calls and for online. But I was thinking about getting because one of them died on me. I got them 2 years ago, and one of them, the battery just died and it won't work anymore. So I figured, the other right one is still working, but it's probably going to die soon anyway. So I need a new pair. So I could have just gotten replacement ones, but then the AirPods third generation, not AirPods Pro, but AirPods third generation is rumored to be coming out sometime this year. But I heard that it was probably not going to come out till more than the second half or third quarter. So I didn't want to wait, but I did want to buy the second generation.
The second gen are terrible.
Well, why? I have the first
to the
generation.
Pros. The second gen are greatly problematic. They have issues connecting. They're not. The sound quality is horrible for second gen. I think they did a far better job with the Pro. The only problem that I have with the Pro.
All I've ever used is the first generation.
I have the second gen in my bag over here. The only problem that I would use them. Well, okay. The one thing that's better on the second gen than the Pros is the mic quality is a little bit better. But all the features on the Pro are far better than the second gen.
I could have decided to go with the second gen or the Pros, but I figured, I'll spend a little bit more and I'll just get a better quality thing.
Yeah, they're definitely better. The only thing that I have a problem with the AirPod Pros is if you see my Vern Poythress interview, I'm always fiddling it because they don't fit perfectly, and I have all the tips, and they don't fit as well as the regular AirPods. The other AirPods just slid in the air and they stayed in place. Because hopefully they fix that issue. By the way, I got used to some of their new designs. They're not as hideous and horrifying anymore. Parakeet, don't worry, we'll get you a new Mac. We'll put together a GoFundMe or for you. Get you off that Linux. laptop there.
Laptop, dude. My
Yeah, it's in
hands
my
have
office.
never touched a laptop in my life. You think I'm some sort of scrub?
Yeah, we'll get you.
Desktops only, sir.
Yeah, we'll get you an iMac.
Well, I appreciate it. Let me know when you have the funds together, okay?
Yeah, I'll let you know.
I won't hold my breath.
Yeah, the MacBook Pros.
Ah.
You banned Darth?
He's been banned. No, I didn't.
Wow.
Discord banned him, probably.
You know, it's so bad that if I were to send that out to everyone, you'd have the room swarming with atheists.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's Darth has been banned, and everyone else is unbanned. Oh, they'd be flooding in here like cockroaches.
What happened? What happened? Everyone tell us what happened.
I can't imagine he disconnected on purpose. He was like in the middle of a sentence, wasn't he?
He was, but it's so late that he probably went, all right.
Yeah, I'm gonna take off too. No debates are gonna happen. It gets kind of boring in here, you know.
Parakeet, is that the name? Oh, no, those are parademons. Okay, anyway, never mind.
No, a parakeet's the name of a small bird.
Oh, that's disgusting.
not demonic in origin.
That's disgusting. All right, thank you.
Disgusting.
Parakeet.
Excuse me?
Yeah, it's disgusting. Anyway. All right, parakeet.
Parakeets can be deadly when aroused to anger, you know.
Yeah, I don't want to hear about birds.
There's about three deaths per century from angered parakeets. Brutal
per
maimings.
century. Per century.
That's right. That's what most people know to mind their attitude, right? But apparently you didn't get the message. Brutal maimings. No one can stop either. People have to just watch it happen. You can't stop an enraged parakeet. All you can do is just keep your distance and hope that its wrath doesn't spread to you.
See, you're terrible. That is a really terrible name. Well, parakeet, let me let you go, so I don't have to ban you from the server.
All right. I'll see you guys later.